And so, welcome to Rules and Regulations, assuring your game is certification ready. So my only assumed knowledge in this talk is that you understand that to get your game onto any of the console platforms, you need to go through a process called certification, which is a set of rules that your game has to comply with. So what am I hoping that you're going to get today? Really, it is why you should start preparing and testing your certification requirements early, how to prep your internal QA teams and production teams, and then also I'm going to touch on how to utilize outsourced certification QA in a more realistic and robust way. So who am I and why am I worth listening to? My name is Megan Summers. I'm the release manager at Tantalus North, and I'm the only release manager at all of Keywords Australia. I have about 17 years doing this. I started in AAA back in 2007 in QA. I worked my way through QA, engine QA, certification QA. I then ran my own studio for 12 years, where we ported games as well as making our own original IP. During our porting phase, there was only 2 of us, so we were running multiple ports concurrently, and we really had to get our processes down, and that's where a lot of this came from. Now that I work at Tantalus North, I've had the privilege of working on projects like City Skylines Remastered, Hello Kitty Island Adventure for PS5, and probably the highlight of my career so far was being the release manager and production on Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition for the PlayStation 5. Over the years, I've worked with some amazing teams working on amazing projects, and most of the time they make the same mistakes, and the same mistakes have had the same outcomes every time. Firstly, they start thinking about console requirements after beta, in that last milestone before, as you're running to the finish line. This usually means that the requirements have not been thought about at all when building the systems. This usually means that required rebuilds to these systems very late in development while trying to get through cert are required, and usually ends up meaning that you hit 3 or 4 certification rounds. They usually book the only certification testing is maybe 1, 2, if you're lucky, rounds of outsourced certification testing. And usually they just give a build and go, here, certification test. No direction, no guidance. You get 5 days. That team just has to figure out how your game works and how it's going to actually fit into the requirements. They schedule their first pass of their certification pass too close to release. This one's a terrifying one. Each cert pass, approximately 5 to 10 days, depending on what platform you're on. If you fail, you then need to find and fix the problems, resubmit, 5 to 10 days again as you're getting close to that deadline if you've already announced your game. It is a terrifying situation for the whole team. It causes crunch, it causes stress, and it usually causes the fixes to not be as robust as they should be. And lastly, they plan on passing cert the first time. If you do, that is wonderful. From a production point of view, never plan for it. In 17 years, I've been on 3 SKUs that have passed the first time. And that was after going through rigorous planning and testing like I'll go through this time. And usually if you've done the first 4 things wrong, that last one is a given. You're never going to pass first time. So what are the dangers of failing multiple times, especially if you haven't planned for it? Missing deadlines. The cost of missing a release deadline is massive. So if you have a publisher, or in my case, clients, they set release dates very specifically for multiple reasons. The timing of the release of competing products, the timing of release of other products in their slate, a lot of money goes into advertising the release of a game as well. So if you are missing a release deadline, you're costing a lot of money. But you're also costing, for indie devs, you're costing a lot of momentum and good faith with your team, with your fans and customers by missing release dates. This also endangers those relationships with those clients and publishers. The bigger your company gets, the more likely you are to be finishing one game and having a second game already in the works. But if your team that you had planned to start working on the second project is caught up having to go back and be fixing the last game, this means that your whole next slate then starts missing deadlines as well. And most importantly, the quality of the product that you are about to release is most likely not going to be as robust as you want it to be. If you are making quick... I've literally just working on a project where one of the change list comments from a developer was, "This is not the best fix. We should relook at this after we've passed cert." Because you're on a deadline. You don't have a choice a lot of the time about making the best fix or the fix that is going to get you to your release date. I find that video games are a lot like buildings. If at the very end of the building construction phase, you've painted everything, you've put up walls, you've put in doors, you've chosen all your fixtures, and then at the very end you're told your foundations are broken and you have to dig them up and rebuild them, the whole structure of the building is completely messed with. This is a lot. This is what it feels like, going through unprepared. I've done it before. It looks fun, but it's really not. So these are some of the things that I've done over my career to mitigate some of these issues. I begin my certification planning, production and QA planning phase, either during the alpha milestone or before. Why alpha? Most of your features are decided on. There are going to be obviously changes, nothing sits in stone, but you should have a very good idea about the whole of your game at that point. But it's also a really good point where some of the questions that going through the cert requirements are going to ask you, it's a really good point to go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. We can actually fit that in and make them robust. I break down all the requirements into 3 categories, and I keep them in one place. They are known, they're applicable, not applicable, and unknown. These are the platform questions that we may not have answered yet, like are we going to have joinable or non-joinable multiplayer sessions? You may not even know that's a thing, but as soon as you're asked that question, you can start making that decision. Are we going to have private multiplayer, or is someone going to be able to jump in at any time? That fundamentally changes how your multiplayer system should be built. Also helps getting these answers as soon as possible. And it also lets production know how many tests are going to need to be run every time we want to run a cert pass. It gives us a really good idea of the shape of the game. Also, doing this early means that if you need client approval or platform approval for anything, so are you doing crossplay? Are you using mods? Is there UCG? The more stakeholders you have, the more time it's going to take to get the decisions out of somebody. And so starting this early and this phase early means that you're not running to the end with unknowns. I have one source of truth. I've worked with a couple of teams recently who split up, had a different page for each 3. The reason I have one source of truth, it's usually a spreadsheet. I've tried other ways. A spreadsheet's always ended up being the best way to go in the end because you can have every test pass, you can have all your notes, you can go back easily. The reason I keep my knowns and unknown, my applicables and not applicables in one place is because in the middle of a project, sometimes your not applicables become applicable. And if you've just put this group aside and said, I don't need to worry about them, you're never going to think about them again, and then at the end of the project, you're like, I didn't even know that was a thing because I thought we weren't doing that. So having them all in one place, having that chance to go over them multiple times throughout the project means you're never going to get something that's lost. As I said, it helps producers see how many requirements in one place. I always have a summary page at the front, which is just red, no, orange, red, green, orange, so that you can either send that to a client, send that to a producer, to your publisher to go, this is where we're at right now with CERT. It gives programmers and designers a heads up as well on how much work there is for them. And then it helps your QA team plan their test passes by knowing how long they may need for each time. So I do this test, this applicable, not applicable, unknown, with every platform that we're releasing on at the same time. Gives you a really good idea of, okay, where does each platform divert? So at the beginning of the system, beginning of development, you can decide, am I going to divert for the platform, or am I going to make one system that sits for the lowest common denominator platform? So space in save games, for example. One of the platforms has a very specific space size, the others don't. Do you divert, or do you make it that that's for everyone? So for your internal testing team, once we've done the requirements phase, we do this again with all of the test cases. Every requirement has test cases. Not every test case will be relevant to your game, so we do the same process again. We go through every test case, applicable, not applicable, unknown. This is great. It helps you plan most effectively for your testing. Some test cases you'll never have to test again. Do I rigorously shake the controller? No? Sweet. I know I'm never going to do that again. I never have to worry about testing that again. Some of the test cases require a full playthrough. So you can get an idea of what requires a full playthrough, how do I fit them together, what am I testing at the same time while I'm running a playthrough. It means your QA team gets a much better idea as to how much work there is in just for your test part, your requirement passes. I also have a little note here. Terminology. Terminology is the most failed requirement on all platforms. It's finicky, it's annoying. Don't test it in-game. Give your QA team your localization files. You can search, you can copy over. It means that you're not having to find every screen in-game. You're actually able to just know what the text is. It's a much quicker process, and then you can do your final tests to make sure wrapping is working and things like that. And then we run all of these tests on our alpha build. That week after alpha, when everyone's worked together to get your alpha build ready and the milestone's done, a little bit of downtime, QA runs all of these tests on that build. It means you have a point in time where you know exactly what the runway to certification looks like. At this point, I either bug everything, even if it was never implemented yet, bug it. It means you have a place in time, it cannot be lost in your database. You know exactly that this needs to be fixed and why. You put your test cases as your acceptance criteria. You know exactly where you're going to be. Or you can go the other way around and task it all out. I'm QA forward, so I'm always going to... I find that sometimes developers will less ignore a red bug with high priority than they might a yellow task. It might not get, not ignored, but pushed down the line a little bit. If you do not, so certification requirements, set of tests, every game has to fit into it, which means that there is a lot of nuance of exactly how your particular game will fit into a requirement. If you do not know Utilize the forums. Every platform has them. There are enough games that have gone through certification now that somebody somewhere will have asked the same question you have. It takes a little bit of sifting to find the answers. There are also commonly failed lists for all 3 platforms and just make sure you've checked your game against those ones in particular. Are you sitting in those correctly? And if you're still unsure, open support tickets, ask questions on the forums. It is better to ask a question early than not ask a question and be failing or re-implementing at the very end of the process. So if you have internal QA during cert passes, why should you have external? So cert testing requires a lot of work. There is a lot of expertise in the nuances of things. Your internal QA is the expert in your game. Cert QA are the experts on the requirements. Sometimes, and having both is really important. If you just pass your game to an external team with no context, knowing how to test those requirements correctly can be very difficult. You will get the base level of where I could find it, I tested it. So it combines that expertise. Most people also don't get the best out of their cert QA. They book one slot, throw the build at them. The limited amount of time, if you have a 60-hour game and 5 days, and you haven't told that team where to test, there is no possible. QA aren't magicians. They don't just know a game. They may know the test requirements, but they're not going to know how your game fits into them. I've also found that a lot of outsourced QA will run every test unless directed. So I've had quite a few times come back with a digital-only game where the disk tests were all run and failed. It seems silly. It's unfortunately a symptom of outsourced testing. Their KPIs need to be different to other places. You need to be able to prove that you've done work. And so, fault of no one, but really frustrating when you're getting fails and you're like, it's a digital-only build. Like, why did you test those? So getting the best out of that QA team. You have now spreadsheets that have everything that is applicable in your game. You can use those spreadsheets to direct the external QA that you're bringing on. Use that same information. If you have places within the game that your internal team were just not quite sure on how it was supposed to work, direct your external team who have that test case knowledge to those particular areas. Get them to double down on it. So I'll never say this is going to help you pass first time, but hopefully this gets you closer to passing on the second. And then you can play Jenga like this awesome cat. Do we have any questions?
Thank you. So in your experience, you talked about going to multiple platforms. What do you find? Do you find they contradict each other in terms of standards?
In some cases, yes. So there, in particular, terminology, it's very interesting. So when it comes to console-approved terminology, any way that you speak about something that either a controller can do, well, even the word controller. Each platform has the word controller, but each platform also has the approved, localized version of that word. And controller and vibration, in particular, is different. Some of the, not in every language, but some of the approved localized terms are different for the exact same English word. I also find that it's not necessarily contradictions, but one platform, for example, will have one rule about something, but then one of the other ones will have 3 extra rules. So you really, unless you're going to divert, it is always safer as long as you're applying to this rule to make the game work on all the extra rules. Suspend and resume, big one. Very different between platforms, a different amount of test cases as well, and the nuances get very finicky on one. I'm also saying platforms and not the specifics because NDAs, things like that. Come talk to me later when we're not being recorded. Save files as well, also very different. How the actual systems use save files and the rules around save files are very different.
Do the platforms themselves have a, I guess, an easy forum to go to or something to kind of find out what their requirements are?
Yes, so each of your platforms will have they have full pages with all of the requirements. So one of the platforms has, I think it's technically about 130 requirements. So it's a full document, lots of links, usually always links out to the implementation as well. And then there are always the forums within those where you can search for people asking the same specific questions as you as well. On that note, though, I will add, the requirements update constantly. So if you are 2 years out from release doing this, continue checking if it's updated because you have to release on the latest version. However, once you've released on a version, you don't have to keep updating. Yeah.
Hi. You mentioned beginning cert planning during alpha and quite early on. If you are planning to do like a Steam early access release to test, just how well it does and things like that, and you don't know if you're going to be going on to, like Switch and things in the future because you want to see success of the product, how up the creek are you to pivot at that point or later?
So that's an interesting one. My business partner actually did a talk at GCAP about building your game to be easily portable for that, one of those exact cases. But I also completely understand as a smaller team, it's often not worth it. So what I would do, it is more difficult to pivot the further on you go, but not at all impossible. A lot of the ports that we did were people who hadn't thought at all about it. They just, once they were releasing, they were like, okay, cool, we're hiring another team here, please just do it for us. There are some things to think about though. If you're using multiplayer, for example, and you have a lobby and you decide to use all of Steam's Windows and all of their interface for that, that has to be completely rebuilt if you go a different direction. So maybe building it yourself first up will make it easier to go to port later on. I would still recommend, even for a team doing that, at around alpha, apply for all of the applications. They're all really simple forms that you usually have to do to get onto the platforms, into their development programs. It's always free. Get in, just have a look, have a glance. You don't necessarily have to do the whole process, but even getting an idea of, if we were going to do this, this is how long it could possibly take. Because if you have a gangbuster game and it's going really well on Steam and you've built up your marketing and you've built up your PR and now you're like, okay, awesome, we can afford to go to Switch. Oh God, now it's going to take us 1.5 years to get on the Switch because we hadn't thought about it. You do slow your momentum. It means you're going to have to do a whole new marketing campaign. You're going to, whether that's money or grassroots, you've slowed your momentum down. Whereas if you can get a turnaround in 6 months, it's much easier as a community while Steam's doing well to have that happen. So yeah, even if you're not doing the full process, I would always recommend if there's an inkling in your mind that you might, especially if you've got a particular platform, you're like, this game would be great on the Switch. Get onto the developer portal as early as you can. Eyeball it, have a look.
I got another question. Do updates and I guess large like DLC, things that add like a lot of content, do they require any kind of certifications?
They do. So one of the platforms, everything goes through cert. It's just much smaller. There's a lot less test cases for DLCs. DLCs are also called something different on every platform. Some of them call it additional content. Some of them call it add-ons. But there may only be 5 or 6 test cases specific to your DLC, and then you just have to keep your stability test cases. You have to keep some of the major ones, but the process is much shorter. It's often a much shorter time as well. This is why I always recommend getting through cert as early as possible, because you can always day 0 patch, you can always day 1 patch. And if you've got through your 10-day process and you had to do it 3 times, getting through a 3-day process twice during that time before release is actually much less stressful for everyone, because you know you've got something that is coming out. Patches as well, depending on the platform. Some of the platforms now have either rapid patches or cert bypass for smaller patches. You pretty much just have to sign a liability saying, I'm not doing anything you've asked me not to. And there will be a set of requirements about, no, if you've added a whole new feature that requires new cert testing, you must go back through cert for a 3-day test. But if you're just fixing some bugs, no new content, then you can just put the patch out. There is one platform, though, where you have to go through every time. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. This has been nice sharing my weird niche knowledge about something that everyone really ends up needing to know about eventually. And can be pretty terrifying while you're in the middle of it. I will anecdotally say the closest I've come to not releasing on a release date is 16 hours. And it was for one of the biggest IPs in the world. So that was, yeah, even the best of us can make mistakes. Awesome. Have a lovely rest of your New Zealand GDC.